Gavin Newsom's meticulously planned path to the 2028 presidency did not quietly fade away in a voting booth. It was brutally and publicly executed on live television, shattered into a million pieces by a single unscripted comment about his ex-wife. Gavin Newsom walked into the Oval Office having made the most catastrophic miscalculation of his entire political career, convinced he could outsmart Donald Trump on the man's own fiercely guarded turf. It was a spectacle orchestrated for maximum exposure, unfolding beneath the blinding glare of 32 hot cameras and highly sensitive microphones, capturing every breath for a voracious public. What Trump would ultimately say about the governor's ex-wife would have been enough to incinerate the career of any ordinary politician, but the chilling reality was that this deeply personal humiliation was not even the most devastating part of the encounter. Standing behind the velvet rope line were 32 seasoned members of the White House press pool, their eyes darting between the two men as live feeds beamed the unfiltered tension directly to C-SPAN. Across the nation, Fox News was already broadcasting the showdown with a glowing, unapologetic chyron that declared Newsom begs Trump for fire relief. Meanwhile, CNN presented a slightly more sterilized version of reality, their screen displaying the subdued chyron. Newsom meets with Trump on California aid, but the underlying electricity in the room was impossible to mask. Donald Trump sat positioned perfectly behind the massive oak of the Resolute desk, situated in the dead center of the iconic room, occupying the physical and psychological space the way a formidable monarch occupies a throne. He was leaning back deeply into his leather chair, his arms spread wide and relaxed, an amused, almost predatory smile playing on his lips long before Newsom even crossed the threshold. He was already relishing the moment, soaking in the anticipation. So, Governor, welcome to the White House, Trump's voice boomed, filling the curved walls of the office. Beautiful place, right? Much nicer than Sacramento. Much nicer than San Francisco, too. Although I hear you don't go to San Francisco anymore. Nobody does. Too many needles on the sidewalk. A ripple of uneasy laughter fluttered through the press pool. Not everyone joining in, but enough to create a distinct, mocking echo. The sound bounced off the historic walls, settling heavily into the suffocating air like the warm-up act before a gladiatorial main event. Newsom's facial muscles tightened, but he forced a blinding smile, the exact, meticulously practiced smile he had undoubtedly rehearsed in the mirror of his private jet. It was designed to project relaxed confidence, meant to be the impenetrable armor of a man who absolutely refused to be intimidated, the visionary smile of a future president greeting a current one. Yet, within the hour, that very same smile would be captured by dozens of lenses, documented dying a slow, agonizing death in real time. Gavin Newsom had explicitly not come to Washington to beg, a fact he desperately needed everyone in that room to understand within seconds of his arrival. He strode into the Oval Office with the aggressive, polished momentum of a man already fiercely campaigning for the highest office in the land. His physical presentation was utterly flawless. His charcoal gray suit fit him like a sharpened blade, and his signature hair was sculpted to perfection. Not a single strand daring to fall out of place, despite the bitter January wind howling between his motorcade and the West Wing entrance. Trailing anxiously behind him was a meticulously curated staff of 6 people, 3 more aides than standard White House protocol suggested, each clutching heavy leather portfolios and a massive presentation binder with the words California Recovery Framework glittering in embossed gold lettering. Newsom approached the desk and extended his hand, initiating a firm, brief shake with no overt power games before immediately pivoting his entire body away from the president and toward the ravenous press pool. He addressed the cameras directly, his voice vibrating with that very particular frequency of coastal political condescension, impeccably polite on the polished surface, yet deeply patronizing just underneath. Mr. President, thank you for finally agreeing to meet, Newsom began smoothly. I know you've been busy with Truth Social, but California has been waiting for federal assistance for 6 weeks. 6 weeks while families sleep in shelters. So I appreciate you finding the time. He deliberately did not pause to allow Trump a chance to respond to the veiled insult. With a theatrical flourish, Newsom placed his 30-page, professionally designed, data-driven folder directly onto the historic surface of the Resolute desk, an aggressive territorial move made entirely without invitation. I brought a comprehensive recovery plan, Newsom continued, his chin raised defiantly. Something your administration hasn't produced yet. 30 pages, data-driven, because I believe in governance by fact, Mr. President, not by tweets. He flashed the full, blinding wattage of the legendary Newsom smile toward the C-SPAN lens, deploying the exact expression that had graced countless high-gloss magazine covers and exclusive fundraiser invitations, fully intending for this moment to anchor his 2028 campaign website. I also want to address the misinformation your allies have been spreading, he declared, his voice ringing with rehearsed indignation. California's economy is the 5th largest in the world, larger than the United Kingdom, larger than India. We are not a failed state. We are the engine that funds the red states that take more federal money than they contribute. Staring dead into the red light of the broadcast camera, he delivered his prepared finishing blow. So, with all due respect, Mr. President, maybe we should talk about what California does right before you lecture us about what you think we do wrong. The sheer audacity of the monologue instantly divided the watching nation. Democratic operatives frantically texted each other from their homes, proclaiming he's presidential, while gleeful Republican operatives typed back, he just signed his death warrant. Through this entire highly choreographed performance, Donald Trump had not moved a single muscle. He remained seated behind the resolute desk, his large hands quietly folded together, his eyes locked onto the California governor with a terrifying, unblinking patience of a predatory cat observing a bird that had foolishly landed on an open windowsill. Trump watched with intense interest, anchored by the absolute, unshakable certainty that this encounter was only going to end in one violently decisive way. When Newsom finally ceased speaking, Trump deliberately allowed the heavy silence to hang in the air, holding it captive for 3 agonizing, full seconds. Slowly, a new smile crept across Trump's face, not the polite, diplomatic smile of a host, but the dark, familiar grin his fervent supporters instantly recognized as the terrifying calm just before the wrecking ball begins its destructive swing. "Wow," Trump whispered, nodding his head with exaggerated slowness. "That was really good, Gavin. Very rehearsed, very polished. You must have practiced that on the plane. Beautiful delivery, really." He waved a dismissive hand toward Newsom's razor-sharp suit, his immaculate hair, and his rigid posture, casually comparing the governor's appearance to a superficial cologne commercial. Trump then reached out and picked up the heavy folder Newsom had so proudly placed on his desk. He flipped through the thick, glossy pages with agonizing, deliberate slowness, embodying the precise body language of a bored patron flipping through a restaurant menu he had already decided he wasn't going to order from. He held up a single page displaying a complex chart, his eyes glinting with manufactured awe. "Very nice paper, very expensive," Trump mused loudly. "This probably cost more than the last homeless shelter you built." Setting the binder down with a dismissive thud, Trump's entire demeanor shifted, his posture straightening as he leaned into the attack. "But since you mentioned facts, and I love facts, Gavin, I'm a big facts guy, let me share some facts about your beautiful state." He tapped a finger against his own temple, his eyes locking intensely with Newsom's. "They're not in a fancy folder. They're up here. And they're not pretty." Pivoting his considerable frame toward the press pool, Trump asked, "Ready? Because this is going to be good." He suddenly dropped his voice from the booming register of a showman to something far lower, a heavy, weighted tone that stripped the room of any remaining amusement. "Let's talk about the fires first, because that's why you're here. That's why you flew 3,000 miles to sit in that chair and pretend you're not nervous." Trump leaned aggressively over the desk. The fires, Palisades, gone. Eaton, gone. Parts of Malibu. Some of the most expensive real estate in the world, gone. Thousands of homes, thousands. Trump paused, his eyes narrowing to slits as he delivered his next blow. "And you know the part that kills me? The fire hydrants ran out of water in California in 2025. You had fires, which happen every year, by the way, this isn't new, and the hydrants went dry because somebody didn't fill the reservoir." He thrust a finger directly at Newsom's chest, who's in charge of filling the reservoir. "You, the governor, that's your job. You had one job, keep water in the tank, and you couldn't do it." With brutal comedic timing, he added, "A goldfish owner does a better job than you. A goldfish owner fills the bowl." The suffocating tension in the room broke briefly as the press pool shifted nervously. Some reporters let out sharp barks of laughter, while others stood paralyzed in stunned silence. The meticulously constructed smile on Newsom's face was noticeably thinning, the corners of his mouth trembling slightly under the strain of maintaining the facade. Trump was relentless. And while people's houses were burning, while mothers were carrying their kids out of burning neighborhoods, you and the mayor of Los Angeles were blaming each other. Trump mimicked a frantic back and forth pointing motion. You blamed her. She blamed you. Nobody was putting out the fire because everybody was pointing fingers. That's what happens when Democrats are in charge. Everybody's a leader and nobody's responsible. Desperation bleeding into his tone, Newsom interrupted, his voice tight. Mr. President, the fire response involved multiple jurisdictions and Trump caught the phrase in midair, repeating multiple jurisdictions with exaggerated enunciation, treating the words as if they were a foreign language he found deeply amusing. That's a fancy phrase Trump mocked. Very governor, very fancy. In business, when nobody's in charge, you know what happens? Everybody goes bankrupt, which is basically what California is. As Trump physically shifted his weight in his chair, the entire atmospheric pressure of the Oval Office seemed to shift along with him. The dark entertainment had returned to his eyes. But fires are one thing, fires happen. What doesn't have to happen is everything else. So let's talk about it. Trump raised both of his hands, framing an invisible movie screen in the air. Let's talk about the homeless problem, because that's honestly, Gavin, that might be the most incredible achievement of your career, and not in a good way. Trump shook his head in mock disbelief. I've built buildings in Manhattan. I've dealt with New York City government. I thought they were bad. I thought de Blasio was the worst thing you could do to a city, and then I looked at your numbers and I said, Bill, I owe you an apology. You're only the second worst. Holding up a single authoritative finger, Trump dropped a statistical anvil on the room. $24 billion. I want everyone to hear that number. $24 billion. That's how much the state of California spent on homelessness over 5 years under this man. He pointed directly at Newsom's frozen posture. This well-dressed, beautiful-haired man sitting right here. And you know what happened after you spent $24 billion? You got more homeless, not less, more. 30,000 more. That's a 10% increase. Newsom's knuckles were beginning to turn white as he gripped the armrest of his chair, but Trump kept hammering the nail deeper. You spent $24 billion more than the GDP of some countries, by the way. And the problem got worse, Trump continued, his voice rising in disbelief. That's like going to a doctor, paying him $24 billion and leaving sicker. You'd sue that doctor, you'd put him in jail. But this guy, he gets to run for president. Newsom swallowed hard, his vocal cords straining against the panic rising in his throat. Mr. President, the homelessness crisis is a national issue that requires Trump slapped the surface of the Resolute desk lightly, the sharp crack echoing loudly. Oh, it's national now, Trump laughed darkly. That's interesting. 10 minutes ago when you walked in here, California's economy was the 5th largest in the world. That was California. California's innovation, California. California's tech industry, California. But the homeless? Oh, that's a national problem. Trump turned entirely to the blinking camera lenses, jabbing his thumb over his shoulder at the visibly deteriorating governor. The good stuff is yours. The bad stuff is everybody else's. That's very convenient, Gavin. Very convenient. This is what they do, by the way. This is what every Democrat governor does. Take credit for the sunshine, blame the rain on Washington. Swiveling aggressively back to face Newsom, Trump delivered the next fatal blow with surgical precision. Your own state auditor, not my auditor, not a Republican, your auditor said you didn't even track where the money went, Trump accused, his voice dripping with incredulity. $24 billion. 30 different programs, 9 state agencies, and nobody wrote down what happened to the money. Nobody. I have buildings where I track every roll of toilet paper. This man lost $24 billion and said, we forgot to keep records. Unbelievable. Trump leaned in closer, his eyes flashing. The auditor also noted that some programs were likely cost-effective. Likely. Gavin, you spent $24 billion. Likely isn't good enough. I don't spend $24 billion on likely. I spend $24 billion on definitely. The president then laid out the brutal mathematics of the failure knowing the cameras were capturing every twitch of Newsom's jaw. And here's the math which you said you love because you believe in facts and data. $160,000 per homeless person over 5 years. $160,000 per person. Trump looked out at the silent, spellbound press pool. Do you know what you can do with $160,000? I'll tell you. You can put a down payment on a house, a nice house. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a yard. He paused, his lip curling into a sneer. Not in California, can't afford it there, also because of him. But a nice place in Texas, Ohio, Florida. Maybe even with a pool if you shop around. Instead, after $160,000 per person, they're still on the sidewalk. And he's here asking me for more money. Turning back to the governor, whose famous smile had entirely vanished, Trump asked a rhetorical question dripping with poison. Gavin, if I gave you another $24 billion for homelessness, what would happen? Honestly, based on your track record, would there be more homeless or fewer? Because your data says there'd be more. You'd spend the money, lose track of it, and there'd be 30,000 more people on the sidewalk. And then you'd come back and ask for another $24 billion. Trump drove the final spike into the argument. It's a subscription service for failure. Newsom was now gripping the arm of his chair with terrifying force, his knuckles stark white. The brilliant magazine cover smile that had confidently entered the room was dead and buried. What replaced it on his face was the hollow, horrified expression of a man hopelessly watching his own house burn to the ground, while a gleeful arsonist narrates the destruction. But Trump was never finished when an audience was eating out of his hand. And then there's the fraud. Trump sighed, shaking his head as if deeply saddened by the sheer scale of the corruption. Oh, the fraud. Gavin, your state is, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a casino where the House always loses. Trump cited the devastating City Journal investigation, his voice amplifying the impossible numbers. $180 billion stolen from California taxpayers on your watch. That's billion with a B, not million. Billion. He began counting off the catastrophic failures on his fingers. $31 billion in unemployment fraud alone during COVID. You know who was collecting unemployment checks? Prisoners. Actual inmates in San Quentin behind bars getting weekly checks. Trump acted out the absurdity, his hands gesturing wildly. How does a man in a cell apply for unemployment? What's his job title? Professional inmate? What's his reason for separation? The state won't let me leave. The press pool could no longer contain themselves. A loud eruption of laughter echoed through the room, and the heavy shoulders of a prominent cameraman were visibly shaking as he struggled to keep his lens focused. Dead people were getting checks. Trump continued mercilessly. People who didn't live in California were getting checks. It was the biggest unemployment fraud in the history of the United States, and it happened in your state. Trump casually name-dropped his billionaire ally, tightening the noose. My friend Elon, great guy, very smart. He could have written an algorithm to catch that in about 10 minutes. But your people didn't catch it because they weren't looking, because nobody looks at anything in California. The president's voice grew harsh, devoid of all humor. You don't look at the homeless spending. You don't look at the unemployment rolls. You don't look at anything. You just spend and hope. And Medicaid fraud and housing fraud and autism program fraud. Every single program your state administers, somebody is robbing it. Trump smiled wickedly. You know what your state motto should be? Not the Golden State, the stolen state. Or maybe come to California, we'll give you a check and not ask any questions. Put that on the license plate. Picking up Newsom's lavish presentation binder one more time, Trump flipped randomly to a page displaying a bright, intricate pie chart, holding it up like a piece of damning forensic evidence. Meanwhile, you show up here with 30 pages of charts. Beautiful charts, very colorful. Somebody got paid a lot of money to make these charts. But I'll tell you what's not in this folder. The $180 billion that's missing from your state. Find that money, and you won't need mine. He dropped the folder onto the desk again, the heavy thud picked up sharply by the sensitive room microphones. It was at this exact moment that Trump's voice underwent a chilling transformation. The theatrical comedy evaporated, replaced entirely by a hard, dark edge that only surfaced when the president had finished playing with his food and was ready to begin the actual punishment. But you know what really gets me, Gavin? Trump asked softly, his eyes boring into the paralyzed governor. The thing that really bothers me, and I've been waiting to say this since you sat down, because you walked in here talking about governance by facts and data-driven policy, and I almost couldn't keep a straight face. Trump leaned back deep into his leather chair, letting the anticipation build before quietly uttering three devastating words: the French Laundry. The infamous restaurant's name landed in the dead silent room like a heavy stone dropped into a perfectly still pond. Every single reporter immediately straightened their posture, sensing the impending kill. Newsom's chief of staff, standing helplessly in the periphery, immediately dropped his gaze to the floor, unable to watch the carnage. Trump painted the picture with agonizing clarity. November 2020. You told the people of California, mothers, fathers, grandparents, small business owners, you told them they couldn't have Thanksgiving together. You closed their restaurants, you closed their churches, you closed their schools. Kids couldn't sit in a classroom. Grandparents couldn't hug their grandchildren. Trump's voice dripped with moral disgust. You shut everything down and you looked into the camera and you said, "Stay home, save lives, we're all in this together." Trump deliberately paused, a masterclass in theatrical timing, knowing exactly how many seconds to let the hypocrisy marinate in the minds of the millions watching. And then you went to the French Laundry Trump spat, $350 a plate, 12 friends, a lobbyist birthday party, no mask, no social distancing, sitting indoors, shoulder to shoulder, drinking wine and laughing. Desperation completely overtook Newsom's carefully curated image. Mr. President. He pleaded weakly, "I've acknowledged that was a mistake. A mistake." Trump's voice violently jumped an entire octave, unleashing the signature, booming incredulity that historically sent his rally crowds into frenzies. A mistake? Going to the wrong restaurant is a mistake. Wearing a brown belt with black shoes is a mistake, Trump roared. You told 12 million people they couldn't see their dying parents in the hospital. Dying, Gavin, dying alone. And you went to a $350 dinner with lobbyists. That's not a mistake. That's who you are. He let the word "are" ring out, vibrating against the curved glass of the windows. And it wasn't just the dinner. You were in an NFL luxury suite, maskless, partying, while your own state had mask mandates. Rules for thee, but not for me. The oldest scam in politics. Trump shook his head in absolute disgust. And you got caught because Fox 11 had the photos, beautiful photos. You laughing while California cried. Pivoting with brutal velocity, Trump shifted into sharp business mode. And while you were shutting down everyone else's businesses, your business. Plump Jack, the winery company your billionaire friend Gordon Getty set up for you when you were 24 years old, that company got $2.9 million in PPP loans. Trump enunciated every syllable of the damning accusation. Taxpayer money. Money that was meant for the barbershop, for the dry cleaner, for the pizza place on the corner that was going under because you closed it, and your wine company grabbed $2.9 million. He aggressively counted off the transgressions on his fingers, methodically itemizing the governor's destruction like an auditor going through a criminal ledger. Step 1, you made the rules that shut down small businesses. Step 2, you broke those rules yourself at the French Laundry. Step 3, your company took the relief money that was supposed to help the businesses you shut down. 3 steps. That's a scam, Gavin, a 3-step scam. Even I'm impressed, and I've seen a lot of deals. Newsom desperately opened his mouth, grasping at any available lifeline. Plump Jack is in a blind trust, and a blind trust? Trump interrupted, howling with mocking laughter. Oh, that's good. Gavin Newsom in a blind trust. The trust is so blind, it walked into a PPP office and grabbed $3 million. Very blind, very trusting. Before Newsom's brain could even process the devastating hit, Trump had already swiveled his turrets to a new target. And the minimum wage thing, the Panera thing, Trump pressed on relentlessly. You made every fast food restaurant in California pay $20 an hour. Every single one. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, every mom and pop taco shop. But somehow, Panera Bread got an exemption. The one chain that didn't have to pay. And the biggest Panera franchisee in the state of California just happens to be your personal friend and major donor, Greg Flynn. Trump smirked, leaning back. Great guy, I'm sure. Great timing, too. The sweat was now visibly beaded on Newsom's forehead as he stammered out a rehearsed defense. That exemption was a misunderstanding that was subsequently. Everything is a misunderstanding with you, Trump interrupted loudly, throwing his hands up in theatrical exasperation. The French Laundry was a mistake. The PPP loans were standard procedure. The Panera thing was a misunderstanding. At some point, Governor, all your misunderstandings start looking like a business plan. Trump instantly spun toward the row of furiously typing journalists. Write that down, he commanded the press pool with a grin. That's a good line. You can use it. Suddenly, the manic energy in Trump's voice vanished, replaced by a haunting, almost mournful sincerity that made the silence in the room feel suffocatingly tight. But here's the saddest part, Gavin, and I mean this. I'm being sincere now, which I know is hard to tell sometimes, Trump said softly. California used to be the greatest place in the world. I love California. I made movies in California. I have property in California. The beaches, the weather, the people. Incredible. When I was young, everyone wanted to move to California. It was the place, the Golden State, the American dream with palm trees. He slowly shook his head, looking down at the governor with a mixture of pity and revulsion. The underlying showmanship remained, but laced within his cadence was the authentic sound of mourning. And look what you did to it. Finding the hypnotic, rhythmic cadence that defined his massive rallies, Trump transformed raw data into a devastating scriptural judgment. 900,000 people left California between 2020 and 2023. Almost a million people. A million, do you know what that is? That's not a statistic, that's a city. An entire city's worth of people who looked at what was happening to their state and said, I'm done. The president painted a bleak picture of the mass exodus. They packed up, sold their house, if they could sell it, because a lot of them couldn't, because who wants to buy a house in a state where the governor can't keep the lights on? And they left. Trump didn't just focus on the citizens. He weaponized the corporate flight. And it's not just people. The companies are leaving. Tesla, gone. Elon moved the whole thing to Austin. Oracle, gone. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, gone to Houston. Charles Schwab, gone to Dallas. He leaned over the desk, his voice echoing with absolute finality. These aren't small businesses, Gavin. These are some of the biggest companies in the world, companies that were born in California. And they looked at your taxes and your regulations and your crime and your homeless encampments blocking their office doors, and they said, we're out. They didn't even say goodbye. They just left. Trump delivered the ultimate historical humiliation. California lost a congressional seat after the 2020 census. For the first time in the history of the state, the history since California became a state in 1850, it has never lost a congressional seat. Not during the Civil War, not during the Depression, not during World War II. Not ever. Until he offered a sarcastic, slow clap. Congratulations, Governor. That's a 175-year losing streak you just started. Leaning forward conspiratorially, Trump addressed the silent reporters as if they were old friends sharing a drink at a dimly lit bar. And where are all these people going? Where are the companies going? I'll tell you where. My states. Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Arizona. States with no state income tax. States where you can fill up your car without refinancing your house. States where you can walk into a Walgreens without stepping over a guy shooting up on the sidewalk. The president masterfully twisted the knife on the cost of living. You know what gas costs in California right now? $4.25 a gallon. National average, $2.82. But here's the best part. The best part. You ready for this? Trump asked the breathless press pool, Hawaii is cheaper than California. Hawaii, an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. They have to put the gas on a boat, sail it 2,000 miles across open water, unload it on a dock, truck it to a gas station. And it's still cheaper than filling up in Los Angeles. Explain that to me. How do you make gas more expensive than a literal island? That takes a special kind of talent. Desperate, trembling, Newsom practically choked out his pre-programmed talking points. Our gas prices reflect environmental regulations that Trump mercilessly crushed the weak defense. Nobody cares, Gavin. Your people are paying $7 a gallon and you're lecturing them about environmental regulations. They can't afford to drive to the environmental regulations. A family in your state spends $26,000 more per year. $26,000 just on the cost of living compared to the national average. That's $26,000 for the privilege of living in a state with needles on the sidewalk and no water in the fire hydrants. What a deal. Mr. President Newsom pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. The cost of living challenges are real, which is why our recovery framework addresses. Trump snatched up the gold-lettered folder like a cheap theatrical prop. Your recovery framework, 30 pages, beautiful paper, gold lettering. You know who else had a recovery framework? Me. I built 500 companies. Some of them failed. I'll admit that. I'm honest. But most of them are still standing. You can walk into them. This thought triggered his favorite topic, prompting Trump to rise entirely to his feet. He always stood when he was building momentum toward a massive punchline. This time, he didn't just stand. He walked deliberately around the heavy desk, closing the physical distance until he was towering directly beside Newsom, physically looking down at the broken governor while maintaining fierce eye contact with the press pool. Which brings me to my favorite subject. Trump grinned darkly. The train. Oh, Gavin, the train. The famous California high-speed rail. How much was it supposed to cost when they first proposed it? $33 billion. How much has it cost so far? $135 billion. $135 billion. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the astronomical number hang heavily in the air. And how many people have ridden this train? Zero. Nobody. Not one human being has ever purchased a ticket, boarded this train, and traveled from point A to point B. Because the train does not exist. Trump spread his arms incredibly wide, encompassing the room. I build things, real things, big, beautiful buildings, towers, hotels, golf courses. You can walk into them. They have lobbies, they have elevators, they have marble. They have my name on them in letters so big you can see them from the freeway. I built them on time and under budget, most of them, and people use them every day. He then pointed his index finger sharply down at Newsom's perfect hair. This man has been building a train for 20 years, and there is nothing. No track, no station, no train. I could have built 6 Trump towers for what California has spent on an imaginary train. 6, with pools and restaurants. And people would actually go to them. Newsom, staring blankly ahead, muttered, "The high-speed rail project has made significant progress in the Central Valley." Trump laughed directly in his face. Significant progress in the Central Valley. Gavin, that's like saying you made significant progress on a cross-country road trip because you backed out of the driveway. Show me the train right now. I'll ride it. I'll be the first passenger. I'll buy a ticket with my own money. Except I can't because there is no train. Walking back around the massive desk, Trump collapsed heavily into his leather chair, violently adjusting his silk tie before shifting gears for yet another brutal offensive. And the shoplifting. Oh, the shoplifting. This is my favorite. You signed that beautiful law, Prop 47, right, where if you steal less than $950 in merchandise, it's basically a parking ticket. Trump acted out the surreal scenario, his hands mimicking the casual theft. So now people walk into Walgreens with a garbage bag. A garbage bag, fill it up with whatever they want, and walk out. On camera, the security guard stands there and watches because there's nothing he can do. They don't even run. They walk slowly, like they're browsing, because in California, they basically are. The statistics poured out of him like venom. Walgreens closed 22 stores in San Francisco, 22 Target cut hours in multiple locations. CVS pulled out of entire neighborhoods, businesses that had been there for decades. Just gone, because you signed a law that told every criminal in the state, steal up to $950 and we won't do anything about it. Trump sneered, utterly disgusted by the failure of leadership. You basically put out a menu. Today's special. Everything under $950 free of charge. Management not responsible. You legalize shoplifting, and then you're shocked that the shops are closing. That's like leaving your front door open and wondering where the dog went. Trump waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a persistent fly. That's like, you know what? I could do these all day. But I've got one more thing I want to talk about. As the president locked his icy stare onto Newsom, the very last remnants of theatrical comedy drained entirely from his face. While the undercurrent of entertainment never fully vanished when Trump was holding court, a chilling, deeply personal darkness suddenly shifted beneath the surface. Your state used to be the Golden State, Gavin, the dream. People came from all over the world just to be in California. The movies, the music, the technology, the sunshine. It was the best. His voice grew cold and detached. And now your companies are leaving. Your people are leaving. Your tax base is leaving. Even your congressional seats are leaving. Trump paused, his eyes narrowing with cruel intent. And you know who's staying? The homeless, the shoplifters, the guys in San Quentin cashing unemployment checks. That's your new California. That's the Golden State under Gavin Newsom. And you flew 3,000 miles to ask me for money. And then Donald Trump paused. The ensuing silence stretched longer than any previous pause in the brutal 40-minute meeting. 8 seconds passed, 9 seconds, 10 agonizing, suffocating seconds of absolute terrifying nothingness. The 32 seasoned reporters crammed into the room, immediately sensed a violent atmospheric shift. It wasn't just a gear change, it was a terrifying blind lane change at 100 miles an hour. Everything preceding this agonizing moment had been strictly about policy, horrific numbers, devastating statistics, and monumental governmental failure. Devastating undoubtedly, but inherently impersonal. Now, the room could physically feel the impending carnage approaching, sensing the destructive pressure drop the exact way. Wild animals instinctively feel the fatal charge of an incoming storm. Gavin, I gotta say something, Trump murmured, his voice plunging a half register into a gravelly, intimate frequency. And the press is going to lose their minds over this. And I don't care, because it needs to be said. And honestly, I've been thinking about it since you walked in. The absolute final flickering ember of the confident, arrogant smile that Newsom had so proudly carried into the Oval Office instantly went totally, irreversibly dark. You know who your ex-wife is? Trump stated, the words slicing through the silence like a scalpel. He didn't wait for an answer. Kimberly Guilfoyle. Beautiful woman, very smart, incredible on television. One of the best I've ever worked with, and I've worked with everybody. Trump casually gestured with his hand, pretending to mull over complex family trees. She was with my son, Don Jr., for a long time. Engaged, actually. So technically, in a weird, very weird way, you and I are almost family, which makes this whole thing very awkward for me, very awkward. The press pool behind the rope line went completely, horrifyingly silent. It wasn't the suppressed, not laughing silent, or the bored, not even interested silent. It was the terrified, holding breath silent. It was the exact paralyzing silence that precedes either a catastrophic car crash or a devastating, bloody knockout blow in a championship fight. 32 hardened reporters and 15 blinking red camera lights were completely paralyzed, all pointed with laser focus at the exact same two men, furiously recording every single micro-expression. But here's the thing about Kimberly, Gavin, Trump continued, his voice terrifyingly calm. She left you, and I gotta be honest, I don't blame her, not one bit. Trump leaned forward, his elbows resting heavily on the historic desk, bringing his face dangerously close to the invisible line separating them. Because while you were the mayor of San Francisco, the mayor, on camera every day, everyone watching, you cheated on her. He held up a thick finger, demanding absolute attention to the grisly details. Not with a stranger, not with someone nobody knew. You cheated on her with your best friend's wife. Trump began counting off the unspeakable betrayals on his fingers, deploying the exact same dramatic gesture he had just used to catalog Newsom's political scandals, now violently repurposed for the destruction of the man's personal soul. Your best friend, Alex Tork, the man who ran your campaign, the man who knocked on doors for you, raised money for you, defended you to the press, believed in you. And you repaid him by sleeping with his wife, Ruby, in your office while you were the mayor, while she was on your staff. Newsom's skin turned an ashen, sickly gray, his vocal cords constricting in sheer panic. Mr. President, Newsom whispered, his voice incredibly thin, stripped of all its former booming bravado. My personal life from 20 years ago has nothing to do with it, Gavin. Trump roared, his heavy palms slamming flat against the Resolute desk as he leaned violently forward. You slept with your best friend's wife. That's not a personal matter. That's a character matter. And character is the only thing that matters when you're asking people to trust you with their money, their safety, and their kids' future. Trump aggressively turned to the stunned press pool, desperately inviting them into the slaughterhouse. Think about this. Trump demanded, his eyes wide, "You're Alex Tork. Your best friend is the mayor. You run his campaign. You go home at night thinking, I'm helping build something, and your wife is sleeping with the guy, and everyone in City Hall knows except you." Trump looked back at Newsom with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. That's not a scandal. That's a Greek tragedy. Except in a Greek tragedy, the guy at least has the decency to feel shame. This guy ran for governor. The press pool remained absolutely motionless, completely trapped in the gravitational pull of the live execution. A single cameraman carefully adjusted his angle by a fraction of an inch, desperate to capture the total collapse of Newsom's face, the rapid, uncontrolled micro-expressions, the terrifying tension locking his jaw, and his completely hollow eyes that were now glued permanently to the wood grain of the desk, because there was absolutely nowhere else safe to look in the entire world. And then, my favorite part, Trump laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed loudly. You said you'd stop drinking. Very noble, very dramatic, except for one small detail. You own 23 wineries. 23. Trump spread his hands in disbelief. A winery owner who quits drinking? That's like an airline pilot who's afraid of heights. That's like a chef who stops eating. How does that work? I'm going to quit the thing that my entire business is built on. Beautiful. The president leaned in for the kill shot, relishing the absolute destruction of his rival's carefully curated morality. And then, this is the best part. You didn't quit, Trump sneered. You went to some life coach, not rehab, a life coach for a couple months, and then you told the Sacramento Bee, on the record, there's no rehab, I enjoy a little wine again. A little wine. The man who owns 23 wineries enjoys a little wine. That's like me saying I enjoy a little real estate. That's like Jeff Bezos saying he does a little shopping online. Come on, Gavin, come on. Leaning so far across the Resolute desk that he was physically closer to Newsom than he had been during the entire brutal 40-minute assault, Trump delivered the fatal, inescapable blow. But the affair is the thing, Trump whispered with a terrifying intensity. The affair is always the thing, because when they asked you about it, when the press cornered you and there was no way out, you gave a press conference. And at that press conference, you said 5 words that I will never forget. Trump pointed a commanding finger directly at the broken man's chest. You said, everything you've heard is true. He repeated the fatal confession with agonizing slowness. Everything you've heard is true. Not some of it was taken out of context. Not it's complicated. Not I'd like to explain. Everything you've heard is true. Trump shook his head in a state of manufactured awe. You stood at a podium and confirmed publicly that you slept with your best friend's wife while married to Kimberly Guilfoyle. And the people of California looked at that man and said, sure, let's make him governor. Standing up straight again, Trump threw his hands wide, dramatically appealing to the absurdity of the entire situation, completely ignoring the cameras this time, shaking his head with what looked like terrifyingly genuine bewilderment. And now he's here in the Oval Office asking me for a check. The sheer gravity of the humiliation crushed the remaining air out of the room. I'm going to give you some free advice, Gavin. One powerful man to another, Trump said, his tone shifting into a patronizing, deadly calm. When your best friend trusts you with his career, with his wife's schedule, with access to his family, and you thank him by sleeping with his wife. That tells the world everything they need to know about what happens when people trust you. Everything. Alex Tork trusted you. Kimberly trusted you. The people of California trusted you. Trump aggressively gestured around the room, taking in the historical desk, the untouched, gold-embossed 30-page folder that was supposed to be the launching pad of a presidential campaign, the blinding lights of the silent cameras, and the total, undeniable wreckage of a human being sitting before him. And look where we are. The very atmosphere in the Oval Office had fundamentally altered on a molecular level. The heavy 30-page folder lay completely ignored on the resolute desk, its arrogant gold title blindly catching the sharp glare of the studio lights. Newsom's 6-person staff had silently, cowardly been reduced to 4. 2 terrified aides had already slipped quietly out of the heavy wooden doors during the agonizing ex-wife segment, presumably rushing to initiate frantic, chaotic crisis communications from the safety of the West Wing hallway. Newsom's legendary hair was still miraculously perfect. His expensive gray suit remained impeccably tailored, but the utterly broken, hollowed-out man suffocating inside of them looked as though he had tragically aged 5 devastating years in the span of just 40 minutes. The slaughter finally complete, Trump leaned back in his heavy leather chair, his demeanor abruptly shifting to casual indifference. "Governor, you came here for money," he noted. Newsom straightened, desperately grasping at the sole reason he had endured 40 minutes of televised humiliation. Stripped of his earlier arrogance, he pleaded for federal fire relief for California's families. Trump didn't miss a beat. "They deserve a better governor," he shot back. Clicking a silver pen like a weapon, the president agreed to send the funds, but strictly on his terms. Blaming Newsom entirely for the state's compounding crises, Trump declared that his own team would oversee every single dollar to prevent the rampant fraud California had previously allowed. This time, Trump stated coldly, "The adults are in charge." He then forced a painfully long, aggressive handshake, deliberately pulling the governor off balance just enough for the flashing cameras to capture the humiliating stumble. Dismissed, Newsom turned to leave, only to be struck by a final, heat-seeking parting shot as he walked to the door. "Tell Kimberly I said hi. Oh, wait, you don't talk to her anymore." Well, Don Jr. says hi. Newsom marched stiffly out of the Oval Office, his eyes fixed dead ahead. Before Newsom's motorcade even cleared the White House gates, the internet was already weaponizing the encounter. 3 brutal, isolated clips dominated global feeds. The first, "Your ex-wife says hi," captured Newsom's paralyzed horror and Trump's victorious smirk in a devastating 7-second loop. It racked up 60 million views by midnight, spawning Curb Your Enthusiasm memes and inspiring instant campaign merchandise. The second clip, highlighting California's $24 billion homelessness failure, hit with structural force. Racking up 40 million views, it quickly became a cultural shorthand for government incompetence across the nation. Finally, the methodical breakdown of the French laundry scandal. You made the rules, you broke the rules. Your company took the money, cemented the meeting's legacy. Across the airwaves, commentators hailed it as the most devastating, perfectly executed dismantling of a politician ever delivered on live television. The media ecosystem erupted in the wake of the disastrous meeting. Fox News broadcasted the uncut 4-5-minute encounter in prime time, handing Sean Hannity his highest ratings in years. Conservative commentators gloated over the president's entertaining takedown, while a panicked Gavin Newsom fled the White House. Confronted by a wall of hostile reporters shouting questions about his ex-wife and the stolen state jab, the governor snapped at the press corps before retreating into his armored limousine. The humiliation quickly dominated every screen in America. While CNN and MSNBC debated the president's cruelty, their coverage only fueled the endless circulation of the devastating viral clips. The political fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Within a single week, Newsom's favorability plummeted by 11 points among Democratic voters. Panic set in as mega donors labeled him unelectable, and influential publications like the LA Times and SF Chronicle published brutal editorials mourning his ruined dignity. Powerful allies like Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries remained deafeningly silent, effectively abandoning the bleeding governor to the wolves. Relishing his absolute triumph, Donald Trump took to Truth Social late that night, mocking Gavin Newsom and his sad, tired appearance to the tune of 2.3 million likes. The following morning, a totally broken Newsom held the shortest press conference of his entire career back in Sacramento. Lasting a mere 4 minutes, he robotically dodged personal questions with a terrifyingly artificial smile before abruptly walking out, leaving reporters to draft damning stories about his visible discomfort. As Newsom and his defeated team retreated, the cruel reality of his ruined career literally clung to the streets outside the Capitol. Taped to a cold metal lamppost was a screenshot of Trump's mocking post, permanently branded with a devastating handwritten epitaph, $24 billion, zero results. The harsh California wind tore at the paper, but the irreversible damage was already done. Yet, as the dust settled on Newsom's political grave, a dark and quiet storm was already brewing in the shadows of Washington, D.C., threatening to unveil an even deeper, more destructive secret that absolutely no one saw coming. What explosive revelation is hiding in the Capitol's shadows? Hit subscribe and tune into the next video to uncover the shocking truth.